things that you need to do as a leader is you need to model the appropriate behaviors. So what would you do for your team? Well, there would be a coaching moment. A lot of times your team is going to be fucking terrified to coach you.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Life by the Horns. You guys, every leader thinks they're hiring for skill, but long before someone proves that they can do the job, you've already taught them how to behave, what's okay, what's rewarded, and what's ignored. And it's not through your handbook. It's not through that values poster that you have on your wall. It's through how you live. Today, we're talking about the uncomfortable truth that you're already hiring your values, whether you like it or not. So, Dustin, let's start there. How's it going today?
Good, man. How are you?
I can't complain, man. I'm not cold, so I'm good, man. So when did it first click for you, man, that your business results weren't random, but they were more, let's say, produced?
Through a lot of scars and trial and error. Yeah, I mean, if anything, I think early on for so many folks, like you hire specifically for talent. And time again, I realized as we were getting deeper and deeper into employment with team members, like they were a shiny piece of paper. And it took many more years to realize also they were an extension of my behavior and how I showed up. So that's where, foundationally a lot of what we do in the hiring process is rooted way before the hiring process, and what we're actually looking for.
When you say shiny piece of paper, what do you mean?
I mean, they check off all the boxes. I mean, I remember years ago we were hiring for a role in the kids entertainment space we were in, which is highly seasonal, which means there's huge influxes and having to get new talent and stuff on board. And there's the downside that comes. There was a guy that I hired that used to work for the Arizona Cardinals. He was like the events director. He coordinated, who was coming to sing the national anthem and where they need to be and what tunnel security. I mean, he was like, man, I had 3 cell phones and, some walkie-talkie deal, and yes, we're used to hiring for seasonal because, from basically August to January, should you make the playoffs, I mean, that's your 5, 6-month season, that's it. And so he worked for the Harlem Globetrotters, for a while too. He traveled. He had this, very robust resume when it came to entertainment. I mean, he was used to the stress that came with it, so I was like, "Man, if we could just land this guy, this will be a beautiful thing," and it was an absolute nightmare.
Talk me through that, man. Was there a moment that you, just in your journey, where you had to admit that maybe the problems existed because you allowed it?
Yeah, and not even and I'd have to take it back even before that. I remember prior to me being super heavily involved in hiring, one of the things that I struggled with was holding people accountable. And the reason I struggled with holding people accountable was because the real mirror was, and I couldn't say this at the time, but the mirror was me. If I couldn't hold myself accountable to the highest level, then how can I hold somebody else? A lot of us go in as leaders in business or business owners, and it's like, hey, here's the standard. Here's what we do. I don't do it. Do what do as I say. Don't do as I do. And there was a lot of reflection of that. And even if I was holding myself to a higher level, it was for a season or a chapter to to look like something that I necessarily wasn't, deeply ingrained with fully. I mean, people see through that shit.
Yeah. What do you think is harder for leaders, seeing, let's say, seeing the issue, or maybe owning their role in it?
Extreme ownership. Yeah, I think there's a lot of blind spots for leaders. There's a lot of pride and ego involved with owning a business and, look what I can do and look what I've accomplished and all this kind of shit. And, I sign your paycheck, so do as I say, don't do as I do, all that kind of stuff. But that's, in my humble opinion, that's not real leadership. I mean, you not only have to you don't have to be the best at the role, but you have to, emulate and be through and through, an extension of what you want those values to look like and show up as. And if you can't do that, it's very hard to get people's buy-in.
Yeah. Take me back to when you hired the guy. You said it was like you're hiring people based on like this shiny piece of paper, right? So you hired this person and you expected everything to go amazing and it went terrible. What are some things you noticed in that situation?
I think I was so excited about the resume that I was overlooking things that were right in front of me. Even though this was the role that he subscribed to or these roles he had previously, if we would have done a culture index with him, a Clifton Strengths 34, or had a deep conversation of our core values had they existed, at the time, there would have been some red flags. He was very timid, he was very much an introvert, and, in the capacity where you've gotta get guys ready to rock and roll at, 5, 6 AM in the morning, have a great day, and it was a long day. Get them, to come back, everything safe and sound, and also encourage them because 'cause they're gonna show up again the next day to do this. He didn't have the personality for it. And the other thing I didn't take into account is, when you're talking, NFL games, you know, Harlem Globetrotters, whatever you wanna call it, it's a much smaller window of success. So, the game, maybe 3, 4 hours long, there's a couple hours ahead of time, a couple hours after, we were managing, 16-hour days. So to him, that was, like, inhumane, "How could you do this?" I'm like, "Man, firefighters work 24 on, 48 off." Like, there's a lot of different trades that do this, and I think, again, I was so excited about the resume, I was blind to the reality of, who he was, what he was looking for, etcetera.
Yeah. So before we even talk about hiring, we have to talk about what leaders actually value because that shows up extremely fast in who they bring in. Most companies say the right things, very few live them. So talk to me about aspirational values versus real or authentic values.
Yeah, well, most companies are full of aspirational values, and they're full of shit. I mean, they are. They want everybody to be on time. They want everyone to do an excellent job. They want, to outpace their competitors and all these things and be more innovative and all that stuff. But a lot of times at the leadership level or the ownership level, it doesn't exist, and it starts to fade off. And so I remember when we started BLG, 5-ish years ago, my biggest internal struggle was to not be a fraud. So as we started looking at, what are these core values that we wanna put in place, that naturally is an extension of the founders. And when there's, it's founders, more than one. And so what is it that we have in common that we're trying to emulate and really, pull out of other people? Because, even though Michael and I are the same in a lot of capacity, we're also very different. We have different history, different upbringings, different families. We lived in different parts of the world, everything. Growing up in different decades, all that stuff existed. So we had to dial in, what made us similar, and also unique, and what could we lean into as we were looking for other people. And so, you have to have some real conversations around that to draw a line. So if you say something, you know, excellence is all, excellence in all we do, or we raise the bar. Well, part of excellence, in my opinion, is being on time. If you're late to a meeting by 12 minutes and you expect the team to recap what they've already went over, no, it ain't gonna happen. If you're also consistently late, do you really think that they're gonna show up on time and give their best? No, it's not gonna happen. If you don't take care of yourself outside of work and set the example inside of work for what that looks like, it's not gonna happen. You can't tell your team it's healthy for you to go to lunch and take a 1-hour break just to disconnect and get away if you sit at your fucking desk all day long. So, there's so many things leaders aspire to be, or they aspire for their team to be, but they don't do it themselves, and that's very aspirational. Like, they look good on a wall, but everyone knows they're bullshit after they've been there for a period of time.
Yeah, 100%, man. And, at some point, leaders realize values can't be just words, they're decisions, and real values start getting a little uncomfortable sometimes. So, talk to me a little bit about a moment where enforcing those values may have cost you something.
There's a lot of moments, man. I mean, sometimes, one of the toughest ones for especially small business owners is you hire family. So, I mean, and a lot of times, you hire family because you're trying to give a hand out, not a hand up. You hope it's the hand up, and then you've got this core group of amazing people, and you're like, "Hey, could you guys give me a little grace in this decision? And if this doesn't work out, ultimately, we'll go a different direction." And the reality is you wouldn't have necessarily done that for somebody else. And, a lot of times when you're a small business owner, you're a fixer, you're a builder, and you're trying to fix somebody, but it can be to the detriment of other people. So that's one instance in which I've seen it. I've seen it in myself so many times when it comes to, like, self-sabotage. Things are going really, really well, and then you do something to self or whatever just to escape, and you don't show up as your best self every single day. So that's not excellence in all you do. not being committed and accountable and those kinds of things. So, I've seen it many a times, and it goes back to that idea of being a fraudulent leader. And then whether leaders want to admit it or not, you can pretend all day long, but you feel it, and it changes your frequency and how you show up. As a leader, you're the weather for your business. If you come in partly cloudy every day, that is what your team is gonna ultimately show up as. And then worst case scenario, well, I would say short term good scenario, but then worst case long term is you have people that subscribe to those values at a very high level more so than you do as the leader, and then they see the cracks in you and then they leave. And I've had to live through that as well.
Yeah. How do you balance like this idea of you living up to your values, right? And going through those ebbs and flows, like let's say where you have a moment where, a moment or a season where you're struggling with your values or living up to those, and also kind of balancing that with grace for team members, right? That might have those seasons too. What does that look like?
I mean, so if you go back to the foundation, I mean, you identify things that are deeply rooted in who you are as a whole anyway, and they may be mildly aspirational. Maybe I'm at this level and I want us to get this, so even you as the leader has to up level to some capacity, which that would be in many cases the goal for a lot of people. Hey, we got to a good place, but we want to be here, so I need to subscribe to this at this point. But there are going to be seasons of life where I mean, you get hit, T-boned by a Mack truck, and you're like, "Okay, things are gonna be a little bit different." Divorce comes into play. One of your kids is super sick or something happens like that, and you're distracted. A business fails alongside something you're running. A partnership fails, those kind of things. That is going to happen, but one of the things that you need to do as a leader is you need to model the appropriate behavior. So what would you do for your team? Well, there would be a coaching moment. As a leader, a lot of times your team is gonna be fucking terrified to coach you and say, "Hey, I need to talk to you about this thing that I've been noticing." Hopefully, a lot of times, close the team is, say, "Don't call me boss," and all these kind of things. They still look at you as an authority figure. In those moments, though, you've gotta be introspective enough and be able to have the conversation with yourself to, "I am not showing up the way that I need to be," and you need to lean into, one, is vulnerability and humility with your team and express that to them, and then what you're going to do to change that, and ultimately, I also think it's okay to ask for accountability. From somebody like, "Hey, if I mean, fuck, I've done it with you, man, with like, hey, we need to go on a especially when it's nice outside, like, we need to go on a walk every day, even if it's only for this much time. We need to meditate. We need to do some of these things. 1, it's good for both of us, but 2, it's an accountability thing." So, yeah, I think all that is fair. And again, ideally, you're doing it for your team. I mean, we had this conversation, like, what, yesterday? And, you were the one that sets the tone for the team. You've had a lot of great things going on in your life right now, which has also created some mild distraction. That is okay. Let's celebrate this moment. We had a team member that had a baby recently. That's great. Let's celebrate this moment. But we also have to get back into alignment with where we need to go. It's okay to get off the tracks a little bit, but we've got to get back.
A lot of times, I think when it comes to making tough calls, um, in line with their values, so to speak, leaders struggle or they avoid it. Why do you think that is?
They're not tough calls if you truly lean into them. Aside from the values that really create a container when it comes to proper decision making and making those decisions much easier. A good leader is also building some really good rapport with their team, which is beyond business. Especially in smaller operations. When you get in corporate America, it's generally a little bit different. But in smaller operations, like them, and what makes it tough sometimes is the human moment that comes with it. There was a gentleman that I worked with, previously. Guy came in as a delivery guy, great spirits. Yes sir, no sir, all the time. And, one of the things I asked him early on is like, "What makes you tick? What keeps you excited to be here for a long time?" And he said, "As long as you guys respect me and you don't fuck with my paycheck." And he kept showing up and doing his thing, and we respected, him and everybody. We never fucked with anyone's paychecks. And so we get the opportunity to move into a leadership role where he had authority, and, for him, from a budgeting perspective, that was much better than the highs and lows of some, more seasonal work. You know, like what happens with most, he started falling into bad habits and sabotaging himself. And so, you know, these realignment meetings, we were having them all the time. And so as we were having these conversations, he was looking to get something for his daughter for her birthday. He couldn't afford it. But, I said, "Hey, we'll take care of this thing." But he met us at our house to get it. He showed up fucking high with his daughter, and I was so taken aback by it. He was also late. I gave him the grace to leave work early. Instead, he went and hotboxed a car with a former employee, shows up at my house high, gets back to work. 2 days later, one of the sales staff mentions, "What are we supposed to do when we can't find our supervisor and the place smells like fucking weed?" And I'm like, "Well, you're supposed to let me know immediately, number 1. And number 2, let me have this conversation." And we'd had a couple of conversations about tardiness and all these things. And finally, what sucked is the human moment. I know when you do not have this job anymore, life is going to get really hard. He was going through a divorce, worked a lot of odd jobs here and there to try to make ends meet. He was going to have to get back into doing that, or he was going to have to, do border patrol and stuff again, which would take him super far away from his kids, which isn't ideal. But I also knew at the end of the day, you can't just keep giving handouts all the time because what you tolerate is the line. Like that is the bar that you set for everybody else. And you can't make an exception in that case. So from, a humanistic perspective, yeah, I cared about him, wish the best for the guy, but it just wasn't a good fit. So it was not a tough conversation. It was a real conversation. And the conversation was simple, "Hey man, we've had this conversation a couple of times. There's some other things that got brought to my attention as of recent. This decision's fine.
Yeah.
I want to let you know you're no longer a member of the team. If you'd like to discuss it in any capacity, we can. Other than that, respectfully, I'm gonna have to ask you to, give us your key, credit card, and all that kind of stuff. And I wish you the best." Guy stood up, shook my hand, said, "I appreciate all the opportunities," and went on his way.
Yeah. And that tolerance thing, I mean, you've mentioned it, like, obviously what you tolerate teaches faster than what you preach, right? And it's those human moments, I think, that human aspect that makes it like difficult for people, I think, to make those calls. It's like, man, I know this is going to affect this person, but on the other side, what you tolerate also affects the environment at work. Like you said, the guy know that, the sales guy's like, hey, like, what are we supposed to do when this is, so other people are noticing. Talk a little bit about, the behaviors that you tolerate spreading and what that looks like in the
I'll
organization.
give you a different analogy that will make a lot more sense to other people, and it'll make sense, obviously, to business owners too. But if you're a mother or a father and you have kids, not a kid, but kids. And, for me, I'll go to my son and say, "Hey, William, did you clean your room?" And sometimes, doesn't do this anymore, but sometimes he would say immediately back to me, "Well, Sissy didn't. I don't care what Sissy did. I'm here to talk to you about your room, which is your responsibility. Did you do your thing?" "Yeah, but," and I'm like, "No, but we're focused on you right now." So the same thing shows up in workplaces. So when you set a standard and someone doesn't meet the standard, especially when everybody else is living through and through, good leadership should also challenge you, the business owner, the founder, the shot caller in this case. And it's happened to me before. Like, "Hey, so and so is a pain in our fucking ass. Can we fire them?" And my follow up sometimes, especially in peak season in other industries, it's like, "Okay, if we fire them, what is our plan to make sure that we can maintain capacity for this brief period of time?" "Well, I'm not sure." Okay, so that either we're gonna have to be doing more of this stuff, which we can do, or we understand what comes with the territory with this individual, and we accommodate it accordingly, which means we're gonna have to babysit for a period of time. And once we get through these next couple of weeks, they will no longer be here unless there's a radical shift in behavior. And sometimes, and some people would say, "This sounds very terrible of you." Sometimes you're using them as a means to an end. They are not a fit for the culture, but there's still work that needs to be done. So if it comes down to safety, ethics, those kinds of things, then I think you just draw the line and have to call it a day with somebody. But, with other circumstances, yeah, we've made some short-term decisions. And in some ways, well, it sounds like you're using them. They still got paid. If we fired them on the spot, they'd be looking for a job and wouldn't be getting paid. So it wasn't that we were using, quote unquote, these individuals. Again, it was a means to an end. They were able to provide, an adequate level of support for the thing that we needed. They were not, meeting the minimum standard. So there was more babysitting, coaching, grooming, and all that kind of stuff. And then if there wasn't a radical change in behavior during that, period of time, well, the ultimate repercussion is you're no longer here.
And then I think also the other piece is, in a situation where there's not a safety issue or, a capacity issue, there's the real chance that you lose a good employee, right? Because you're tolerating something, that, people are watching, right? Have you ever had an experience where you've lost or seen that happen in another, one of your.
Yeah, believe it or not, here. So years ago, we had 2 developers. One of them was a full stack developer, the other one was more of a junior that was learning. There was a lot of ego involved between both of them. One of them was former military, definitely had a hothead. Great job of keeping it contained most of the time. The other one was very good at manipulation and saying things to trigger people, and I don't remember the exact circumstance, but all I remember was I was on a coaching call and I got interrupted by the marketing manager, and she was like, "I am so sorry, you need to get in here now." And I'm like, "What?" And I mean, you think about it, like in the marketing and development world, you don't think about 2 guys, being about to go toe to toe with each other. And so I go in this room and they're both yelling at each other. And I'm like, one of these guys could kill the other one. So this is not even the A, it isn't fair. And no, I don't want to have to deal with this. So I pulled each of them aside, listened to both their stories. Both of them were wrong. Both of them, it was very emotionally led. Both of them had deviated so much from our core values. One of them was trying to manipulate the situation, around getting the other one fired and I don't feel safe and all this bullshit. Like you literally are the one who instigated this behavior. His retort to us was, "Oh, so you're saying that women that get raped, it's because of the clothing they were wearing. So that's basically what you're telling me." I'm like, "No." That's the most asinine thing I've ever heard. Honest to goodness, both of them ended up getting let go very shortly thereafter. We had to separate them. One of them went fully remote. It was just awkward as hell for the whole team because people witnessed this completely belligerent and emotional behavior. It's not something that we tolerated, and I think within a couple of weeks, both of the guys were gone. Real talk. Most marketing problems aren't marketing problems. They're business problems wearing a marketing hat. Cute, but very expensive. Maybe you're getting traffic, but it's not converting. Maybe you're converting, but your average sale is too low. Maybe things are fine, but not scaling. That's usually a system issue, not a need a new ad issue. So here's the move. Let's hop on a short call, look at your business, and see what's really holding your growth back. No pressure, no pitch, just a fit check. If we can help, we'll tell you how. If we can't, we'll tell you that too. Tap learn more and grab a time.
I've heard it a lot of times where people are like, hey man, like, or you can kind of see, I remember I expressed this to you a couple weeks ago, but I remember I worked in a job and I was really excited when I got there, production through the roof. And I couldn't for the life of me figure out why everybody was just doing the status quo. I'm like, and I was getting recognized for it. And then all of a sudden, people were like, hey man, like, can you chill? Can you relax? Like, you don't have to produce this much. And thinking back, like over time, not getting rewarded or not over time, what you would see is people would come in, they'd be doing a great job. And then eventually, like things would just kind of get down to the status quo. So it's like and most of the people that were wanting to be challenged would just up and leave. And that points to that idea to me that like, what you tolerate like is eventually you're going to lose the people that are would really take you to the next level. The other side of that, or just to shift gears though, I think a lot of leaders say things like personal life has nothing to do with their company, or like they're separating business and personal. Why do you think that's wrong? That's a fairy tale. I mean, it's not real life. You're working with humans, not robots. So, and to go back though, just a second, I think that's a good point that you made. Core values are there to protect, but also to promote and praise. And too many businesses lean on them way too much to protect. So here specifically, I don't do raises and promotions based off of time. That doesn't fucking matter. Are they leaning into who we are fully? And if they are, I promise you, in every aspect of somebody's work, it is going to show up. And the performance will be there. How they take care of people will be there. They take care of themselves will be there. How they live outside of work is going to shift. Like there's so many positive things that come with it. But if you just create this container of this is the expectation and there's never recognition,
or praise or promotion or whatever you want to call it in that process, you also erode what that is. And so, back to your thought of, keep work at work and keep home at home. You can do that to some capacity, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt for somebody who's, says that I can compartmentalize things and all this kind of shit. Well, the real reality is if you really love your wife and you have some really hard times, yeah, work can be an escape, but it also shows up at your work
Yeah.
and how you communicate with other people. If one of your kids is super sick and you're just hoping and praying that medication works and the doctors do a good job and all that, you're gonna wear that. If you're having financial strain outside of work, work can be a good escape, but I also promise you, you're thinking about when the fucking bill collectors are calling you, when your wife reaches out and says, "Why did the gas just get shut off?" and all this kinda stuff, so, again, it's a fairy tale. What most business owners think they want is that idea. When you're here, you're perfect, you're checking off the boxes, you're doing a great job, you're living into our core values and all of this kinda stuff, but unless you're a fucking psychopath that has no emotional connection to things, it does show up. And I think it is very important for leaders to realize that, and that goes back to the rapport building with people. Hopefully, you have a good enough relationship where they share these kinds of things that are going on. And I love something that, Miles spoke about in a business that he was in for a long period of time. Very, very big business. A lot of people, I think a couple hundred employees that were underneath him specifically. And he talked about some of these things that show up in people's lives, whether it be cancer of a spouse, which showed up in his life. And they had to navigate through for 9 months and, what the organization did for him. Team members that got cancer and what they did. For us, a mother having a baby and going on maternity leave and what that looked like. Now, yes, the business has to pivot and do well for the business, but the other thing that the business has to be mindful of is how you show up and serve your people. Everybody else is going to see. And when you also get to the point, especially if you're, like us and most of your team is remote, they don't know all of the things that are going on. So when a team member is let go, there has to be a conversation with the team that unfortunately or fortunately, they're no longer a member of the team and this is why. And it's a good idea to lean into your values to show why
Well,
it wasn't a good fit.
I think that's the one thing that's made letting people go. It's never easy, right? Because obviously there's that human aspect, but there's not regret. You know what I mean? Like because of the core, like having those values, knowing those values, and always just going back to that as like the, hey, look, like we've had conversations. These are our values, and we're just not aligned.
Right. And
You,
and for a lot of business owners, and to your point, it's never easy. If they lie, cheat, and steal, yeah, I mean, sure, you're like, all right, get them the hell out of here. But, it may never be easy. But the other thing that you have to look at the relationship with, like, let's say it's a pretty good team member, there's some sort of cultural rift that's going on. I remember letting go of our first team member very early on at BLG. She was a great fit in another organization for a period of time. She had taken on some other responsibilities outside of work that were making her dead ass tired all of the time. She was also young and liked to party with her friends. She had a couple of relationships going on at one time. When flowers got delivered, we didn't know what guy it was from, like, and, period, it was kind of comical. And then when we said, "Okay, now," and we had opened up BLG and, "Hey, standards are gonna be a little bit different, and this is what this looks like." We moved her out of her private office to, you can call it whatever you want, an incubator, think tank with the rest, and she was pissed. Why was she pissed? Because now everyone could see her falling asleep at her desk. Now she couldn't just shut her door and hide. So she wasn't being committed and accountable. And, it wasn't excellence in all she did. She wasn't raising the bar. And so, like, literally in that moment is where, and I'm like, look, we'll move your stuff for you. It's no big deal. I sat her down in my office and then she was furious, so pissed off she couldn't even speak to me. And I was like, here's what we need to do. You need to take a few days, think about, this new environment and this new arrangement, get some rest, and let's circle back. And we did. And it was not even an open conversation or open ended conversation. It was me telling her, like, hey, I think you're a great person. You've got a lot of talents. You're probably just not good for here anymore. Fast forward, still acquaintances. And she shot me a message over a year ago. It was like, you're one of the best bosses I ever had. I'm like, I fired you. But sometimes letting somebody go is that up level that they need. But a lot of times the attachment that they have to the business is the paycheck in many cases. And sometimes when you take, I mean, basically derail the car entirely and say, life's got to go down a different direction. If you're honest with them, chances are, if they're honest with themselves too, they'll find something that's better for them.
Yeah. And I think actually, to be honest, that breeds leaders in the future, and that's actually my next question for you. Where do you think most leaders actually learn their values?
I mean, hopefully they come from home to start, but homes can be very fractured. And I think a lot of parents do a bad job of creating a good emotional container and teaching emotional intelligence at a young age and creating safety and all those things. So unfortunately, the reality is the byproduct of that is it's learned in business a lot of times and from mentors. And because you spend so much time inside of a business as a young person, hopefully anyway, unless you're creating your own thing and kudos to you, you learn that from other leaders. And a lot of times you emulate their behaviors. I did that as a young leader. I my goals were aspirational with the idea of senior level leadership and all this kind of stuff. Why did I care about that? I just wanted more money and for more fucking people to listen to me. But I was doing it for all the wrong reasons. And so I emulated what guys at the top were doing, and they were robots at best. They had really no emotional regulation. Their decisions weren't highly logical. They just grinded themselves into the ground day in and day out. And I remember one of the gentlemen that I aspired to be for a very short period of time at 34 years old, quadruple bypass surgery. As soon as he comes out of it, he's asking for his laptop to get back to work. And I'm like, man, this is a dude that hustles. Was on the road at least 6 days out of the week, barely at home, had 4 or 5 kids, little kids too. And for a short season of my life, I was like, oh, this is what you have to do. And I emulated some of that, when I got into my next leadership role. And then when I started watching leaders around me squander and go different directions at the worst possible times, in the moment, I thought it was them. As I got a little bit wiser and more scars, I realized it was me the entire time. So as a leader, you have to be very mindful that people are learning from you.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like move into my next point, you have to build almost these guardrails for yourself too. Most of these guys or leaders will hire for the upside and hope that discipline is going to show up later. Why do you feel like that's backwards?
So I mean, there are some roles in life where the skill really matters. You want a great fucking heart surgeon, right? You don't want just the guy that's super nice. You want a great architect. I mean, AI's come a long way, but still right now you want great developers. But outside of some of those, highly skilled roles, which there's nuance that comes with that, a lot of companies are willing to make exceptions to personality based off of the skill of the individual. But for the masses and the majority of roles, it's not fucking rocket science. And you're hiring for character and competence first. And if you have those things, I mean, hell, we even yesterday, as I was putting together an SDR scorecard for our new sales development rep and what he is looking for when he's talking to, prospects, one of the things is, are they coachable? If they try to steer everything and downplay shit and everything else, do you think they're going to be a good fit here? Probably not, because they're not the expert. Same thing in the interview process. Tell me a time you worked on a project in which, things did not go according to plan. What did you learn? I'm great at everything I've done and blah, 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 because I'm a perfectionist and who cares? Or I had this one project and I was working with two other individuals and they weren't doing their job. So it was all on me. We still got it across the finish line, but I realized I can't trust other people. And it's like, nah, you're a poor leader. And those are things that you look for. But, if they said I was working on this project and here's what I did, and unfortunately these circumstances happened, so I had to pivot and I had to call in this external party to help get this thing across the finish line for the due date. And what I realized in the process is, plan A sounded great, but I should have had a plan B just in case, and so on and so forth. And here's what I learned from it, that life and work are not perfect. So always, plan for XYZ or try to. Okay, we learned something from there. This guy's got a little humility, or this gal's got some humility. That shows some character, that shows some competence. And I mean, we do the same thing internally. There's folks that are very skilled, but they're in such alignment with our core values. When we've looked to, fill another role, a lot of times I look inward before I look outward. It shows the team that we care about the people and growing them here. And they may not be ready, but guess what? We can teach them.
Yeah, 100%, man. Tell me this: what's one irreducible minimum that every leader should have?
I don't think it's with the team, man. I think it's with yourself. I think you really have to go back and look at the core values that hopefully you're not just aspiring to be, but that you live by, and then you've got irreducible minimums in each one of those. What does that look like for you? And then I think it obviously is for you to decide what those things are. But if it doesn't start with you, it is exceptionally challenging to hold the team accountable for those things as well. So, and I'm sure folks have read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. It's a great book. It's hard for a lot of people though. And what I've noticed when I've read this book with teams before, there's always one or two individuals that didn't like each other. And then they say, well, I hold myself extremely accountable for everything, but fuck him because he doesn't. And it's like, oh, you're not even holding yourself accountable for your fucking emotions right now. Like that you're letting them drive how you feel. Why are you feeling this way? It's a reflection of you, not them. And so I think again, it just goes back to extreme ownership and those irreducible minimums for yourself. And then you can say, this is the baseline and this is the bar. And this is where everybody has to be at. But if it doesn't start with you, it's very hard to hold those people accountable. And that's why if you go back to, 6, 7 questions ago, with this idea of, keeping people to the standard and all that kind of stuff and having the tough conversation when they don't, it's only tough when you're not doing it and when you have not coached them to that. The toughest thing in the world, in my opinion, is firing somebody and they had no fucking idea. What do you mean I haven't been doing a good job? And it's like, well, you didn't as the leader identify KPIs and what performance looks like. So it's been very gray. You've allowed them to blame other people for their lack of success instead of having the tough conversation. And then just on a random Tuesday when they come in, you fired them.
Yeah, that's the worst. That's the worst. It should always be expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes it so
We
much
we
easier.
they
Yeah.
missed coming to this, that meeting because they knew.
Yeah, man. I think it's so funny. I remember all the mental gymnastics I went through for the first fire that I had
It's
here,
hilarious.
and sit down with the person, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I figured this was coming," and I was like, "What?" But I mean, yeah, man. Like if if you're true to your values and you have those conversations and you continue to talk through those things, like it's people know, people know.
And I'll say one other thing with the question about this minimum standard. One of the absolute minimums you should look for in your people, though, is coachability. If they deflect and downplay in those moments and they don't have the humility to say, you're right. And yes, I've seen that. And this is what's going on. And this is what I'm going to do to make it better. Yeah, I mean, you have failed before you even got started. Because then you start, for a lot of leaders, you get so frustrated that you're leaning into logic and it's right here that a lot start tripping into emotion. And when you start leading as an emotional leader, it gets very chaotic. So if they're not coachable, I don't think they're the one.
Yeah, agreed, man. All right, now time for our rapid fire question round. Are you ready? You better be, man. Nah, here we go. Let's see. Culture fails because of clarity or courage.
Clarity,
One behavior leaders must stop tolerating immediately.
lack of coachability.
Yeah, so who leaves first? If your culture is broken, at like your work culture is broken, who tends to leave first?
Honestly, I think it's your clients and then
Hmm.
your team.
Values matter most when they're convenient or costly.
Costly,
And finally, leadership is caught or taught.
taught. Actually, I don't know, man. Yeah, now that I think of it, I don't know. I would have to actually go back and say it's caught. A lot of times people are trying to teach it, but it is taught through what they're catching in your actions. So what I mean by that, a better, and I know this is not a short answer, a better analogy of that is, and this has happened in my own life, you can tell your kids drinking is bad for you. You can also watch your kid turn 21 years old and go to his first day of work and come home with a six pack. And the first thing that he does is down one because he had a shit day. So I tried to teach it is bad for you. What he caught was some, poor behaviors of my own. After a bad day at work, you drink.
It's bad for me now, but once I'm old enough, I can do it because dad does it 100%. So, guys, your culture isn't confused, your team isn't unclear, and your results aren't unlucky. They're perfectly aligned with what you tolerate, what you protect, and what you model every day. So, before you hire again, before you rewrite your values, before you blame the market or the talent pool or, Gen Z or whatever, look in the mirror because culture doesn't start in the conference room. It starts with the leader who walks in first. This is Life by the Horns, and we'll see you next time.